ready to go?
Do you want me to do like a 30-second intro?
Go for it.
Yeah. Hi everyone. Welcome to Zero Fridays with InnDex and George. Yeah, you're going to talk through for 10 minutes about what InnDex is and how you see the world, and then we'll get into discussion. There you go.
Nice one. Brilliant. Cheers, James. Yeah. So InnDex, where did it start? Myself and Aaron, both civil engineers, both worked in the industry the last 10 years, working in the construction part of the construction phase. So I work for principal contractors and Aaron more in the supply chain. Where did InnDex start from? It actually started around the induction process and, the compliance part of CDM and Health and Safety at Work Act, collecting information on individuals as they're coming onto site, in terms of that auditability and compliance. Quite quickly then moving on to improving productivity out on the work site, and then obviously the amount of data that we're collecting. There's lots of things that we can do with that information, that data, including baselining carbon efficiency. So quick run through, what is InnDex? It's a cloud-based software. We have multiple different features. We've got about 40 different features in there. I'm not going to bore you to death with those because we're here to talk about carbon and what we're doing there. So there's three parts of the construction phase that we see as being crucial in starting to baseline what our carbon spend is. Being able to then transfer that into, how do you get your supply chain to come on board with that, and how do you incentivize people actually make carbon? So materials, people, and plant. We focus on people, and then we work with other softwares and other companies bringing in information on the materials and the plant side of things. So carbon tracking in InnDex, what is it? So we've got an integration with DVLA, Department for Transport, and Google Maps. From the induction process, we understand, where people are coming from, where they're going to, what type of vehicle they're using or transportation they're using. And we're using then time management when people are clocking into site to then understand via Google Maps what the route they likely took that morning. So we can really understand exactly that carbon spend of the individual coming to and from work. We can also do it on materials coming to and from the job site, and also with plant as well. So with this, what we're able to do is automate dashboards. We're able to really understand that those scope 3 sides of the carbon spend. So a principal contractor can implement the software. They can then baseline the data from all of their supply chain, and then they can export, share, and report against this. So they can do that internal of InnDex. They can export it into their Power BI models. They can push it into other data sets and match it up. It's totally up to how they want to use that information. And then the next step that we're working on is the integrating with those other software systems. So I haven't explicitly called out the names of the other softwares, but people like Qflow, people like Scrap for materials management, so waste and materials on and off the site. We're looking for more partners to be able to pull in and aggregate that information with as well. And then we're also talking with, plant telematics companies as well. So we really do think that if we can get the people, the plant, and the materials data baselined on projects, we can then actually start to understand what we're spending on a daily basis and reduce that down. So what you see here is a bit of a graph. This is a Crossrail station in East London. I'm not going to call out who it is, but we've been working with these guys for the last 3 years. If you look at that, how many kilograms of carbon's been spent, and this is just on people coming to and from the site. It's a huge amount on a daily basis. There's over 800 kilograms of carbon just being spent, nearly a ton of carbon on a daily basis. Then at sort of the peak times throughout that project. So we're breaking this down for this particular client. They're understanding their supply chain. They're actually now being more strategic in terms of the tendering process for future jobs. So it's it's an exciting place to be. Another project that we're working on, we've actually been nominated for a Digital Construction Excellence Award at the CN Awards for these lot. Mid-group, I'm sure some of you have heard of these guys. They're MMC, so lots of off-site fabrication and then bringing it in, deliveries timed, utilising InnDex through the delivery management system, understanding that carbon spend. I'll share this after if people want to sort of have a good sort of look through, what this is, and we've got more information. We've got it broken down into sort of more stats and stuff like that as well, if you're interested. And I think I'm just going to open it up to any questions that people have got now. I know that was very short and sweet, but that's sort of where we're working on, and we really do think that, you know, it sounds like a small thing, but it can really make a difference. And as we've all spoken, it's all about those small percent differences that we can make.
That's brilliant, George. Any questions first off?
I love the slide on the 800 kilograms or a ton a day being burnt in the supply chain to build one station. I think that's so meaningful. We don't have a handle of the impact we cause in the industry, and having it factually represented the way you just did was fantastic. So congratulations. That's really, really good. Excellent. My question is, do you think the data sets that you're now getting can be used to make procurement decisions?
I'd love to say yes.
Okay.
I think it's a really good question. I think that needs to be posed to the right people, because I absolutely believe that should be what they're used for.
So George, I think the answer is yes too, but I think we need to guide procurement professionals on what questions to ask, because I think we're asking the wrong questions when we make our decisions, our evaluation decisions. And also, and that's not their fault, because we like to blame procurement, like that's kind of what happens. It's about making sure that we give them the data to ask the right question, and previously we didn't measure that stuff, so that's not their fault. That's kind of, I'm going to protect them a little bit, as I am one of them. So that's, I think, a nice way. It's always Gareth's fault. But I think it's a nice way of saying how we can improve procurement, because I'm often asked that question: is how do we, you know, if it's our fault, fine, but how do we make it better? It's using your data, I think, is kind of the answer, isn't it?
100%. You know, we're collecting a lot, and we're seeing the transition towards collecting a lot of CSR data these days. You know, that is going to help with reducing down carbon, because if you're employing a local workforce, you know, you're going to have people traveling less distance every day. And, you know, it's a big problem in our industry. You know, when I first came into the industry, I was told you're going to be in digs somewhere, you'll probably be a couple of hours from home, you know, and that was just fine. And, you know, you just accept that. It's ridiculous on both a social, sort of personal, you know, to accept that personally, to be living away from home just because of the profession that you've chosen, is ridiculous. But then actually, in terms of an impact on, you know, your carbon spend, and, you know, your economic side of things as well, where you're going to be spending your money. You're not spending your money locally to where you live, because you're not there half the time. So, you know, there's so many factors that we need to bring into this, and I don't think that it explicitly needs to be maybe pushed from, you need to spend less carbon. I think we can bring that down in alignment with placing more on the CSR information that we're collecting.
Yeah, John, do you want to go in? I've got a question as well. Chris, we talked about carbon loaded programs earlier, but John, yeah, you go. You're on mute.
Terrible. That's not going to be online forever. Asha, you were involved in this discussion actually at the workshop on Wednesday. Something that came from, I think it was Keith Stockdale at Skanska. He said one of the things they want to implement in all future projects is having carbon as a key metric for all supply chain analysis, and that it wasn't just kind of like, what's your material? It very much was focused on where they're based, how they travel, all those kind of odd metrics that historically we probably wouldn't have taken into account. But it's clear from that kind of chart from Crossrail that could be a really useful metric for people to use for supply chain analysis. So how did you go about gathering all that data, I think was the question. So where did it all come from? And
so the induction process, you know, it's a Health and Safety at Work Act requirement that the principal contractor collects, you know, personal information on individuals. So part of that is, you know, where are you from, where do you live, you know, where your digs are, and you know where the job is, number plates and stuff like that as part of just information that's collected as part of an induction. The real drive and the information, I guess the place where you get the most information from on this is Network Rail projects, Highways England projects, because they track fatigue. You know, it's a really, really important measurement that they're trying to understand to make sure people aren't working over their hours and stuff like that. So, you know, that's how the information in terms of travel time to work and distance that you're traveling on a daily basis is so accurate, I guess, from the information that we're collecting.
That's I think that's one of the things that will end up in the framework at some point. The idea up and down supply chain analysis and their carbon impact on the job. Because if you're picking five, if you're analysing five supply chain members that do the same thing, one might be the cheapest, one might be the lowest carbon, but slightly more expensive. So that's definitely something that could probably apply to any kind of framework that you put together. You need to throw that graph into the Miro to give James something else to deal with, George.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. No, I totally agree. You know, this is, I spoke to James about this before, and it's that whole, you know, program built on carbon, but actually break that down in supply chain. You know, where is your civils contractor? Where are they coming from? How much is a daily spend on average in terms of getting people to and from work? You know, why can't it be part of the mix?
Yeah. So George, we were talking. Chris Needham, are you there? So Chris and I this morning were attempting to add detail to the framework. George, this is exactly what we need to connect, or to give us rates, Chris, basically rates for programs, so we can kind of then plan better with carbon, or some kind of visibility of carbon as we're planning. And so it's the same for supply chain analysis. It's the same as procurement, Gareth, isn't it? It's just bringing carbon visibility to the decisions we're making. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Because we always get, we can get the data for the materials quite easily. But the stuff that you're tracking, that's what we don't really have. Like the stuff, you know, how we actually build it, we don't know what the outputs are. So that's something we really need to get hold of.
I'm always shocked at just how much it really is. You know, when you start looking at the charts and understanding, you know, on a daily basis, you'll be spending that much carbon on getting people to and from the job. You know, it's just it's crazy, really. And maybe, you know, maybe you could turn around and you say, well, this actually puts more pressure on moving to a more MMC model. You know, because it's less people having to get to the job site.
Yeah, well, it all adds up. And that's just people you're just tracking people going to and from work, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
And we still need to close the loop on when they're at work, how much we're actually doing to put the building up or do any activity on site. It's never ending, you know. But if you can get constants like that fairly easily, then we should be able to get constants for the work on site somehow.
I think there's Tommy Williams. So you on the call? Because that might be something that you can throw in there.
Sure am. Yeah. Hi. Yeah, I think that's definitely something we're looking at. So movement of people and machinery around site, and not just, you know, huge earthworks equipment, but 4x4s, you know, basically anything, and understanding the relationship between the work that's been completed and the efficiency, I suppose, of the movement of those things.
A quick question to you both then. Do you see a convergence with all the data you're collecting and all the platforms, the work you're all doing? Is there a convergence where, let's say, us as planners or Gareth as you're reviewing supply chain, you're going to be providing much more clarity to us and visibility on what we're doing? It's going to come together at some point, isn't it? And we'll have the tools and the data to be able to plan better, procure better. And how far away is that?
I totally agree, and you know, I think that, you know, we can start using some of these projects that we've been working on over the last 3 years to give that baseline data to allow you to put that in your planning model, you know, you can rebuild the program in terms of what was actually delivered compared to what was meant to be delivered, and then we can start like, you know, analyzing why you're getting peaks and troughs and how we can mitigate those and that sort of stuff.
We should perhaps try it with like a, you know, loading a project or a hypothetical project with these resources and just see what comes out, you know.
George, I did a similar study at the end of Crossrail because I was asked to by the client to on the ethnicity data that we were collecting through the induction process as to who built Crossrail. And it was really, really interesting, really interesting. The outputs of that study made me think really differently. And I won't go into the detail of what that was, but it's, once you start measuring these things, it becomes far more realistic and tangible. And the problem with our industry, and I almost want to kind of put this to us as a group, is should we have estimators? Because we estimate so much, it brings in this vagueness that's kind of accepted as the norm. Why don't we deal in fact rather than estimation? And I want to move to going straight to the BIM model to tell me the quantities rather than guessing the quantities, because I've 20 years of being a procurement guy, I've always asked, well, how much? And then they look at me and say, well, you tell me, you're the quantity surveyor or the estimator. And I'm like, well, I don't know, because it's the design's not clear or blah, blah, blah. Let's get to what it actually is and connect into the BIM model that tells me the answer rather than estimating the answer.
That's a bit of a weird idea. It might add zero value and probably wreck some lives, but might do something good. Back in 2012, when BIM was an emerging embryonic thing of no one knew what it was, there was a series of competition called Build Lives. I don't know whether anyone was involved in them or heard of them. And basically, they were like competitions to test the framework of the PAS documents. Why don't we do something similar for carbon and kind of create? All it did was give you a virtual brief and you did a virtual project in like 40 hours, but like a hack. Why don't we create the framework, plug in all these things, these ideas we've got, and test it and see what it looks like and actually produce something?
Yeah.
Gareth, you can come up with a procurement strategy. George can measure all, you implement InnDex. James can do like, do you know what I mean? Like, bring all the tools and the ideas that we've got in the framework and create a virtual project and actually test everything.
Yeah, you could test the framework. You have to test the framework because otherwise it's nonsense, isn't it?
Just do a hack, but actually pretend we're building it so we can then simulate the transport of the staff. We make a virtual supply chain. We just basically run a job over simulate a 2-year build process or something like that. Maybe towards the end of the year, once James, by then next week, once James has finished the framework, we can plug all this stuff into it and show the industry what they could be doing. Even if it's hypothetical, it's like a hypothetical demonstration of what a low carbon project could look like.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that a 2-day hackathon type?
Probably. I mean, it could be, you could do it over doesn't have to be 40 hours no sleep. I love them, but you could do it over like 3 afternoons or something. I mean, it's obviously 48 hours. Maybe that's something we could bring one of our partners in for, maybe.
Yeah, I'm thinking of some names and since this is, yeah, definitely. So a 2-day hackathon, assemble a like virtual team and put together the best version of low carbon management, delivery and planning with good data behind it, Gareth. Yeah, you're saying kind of trusted, like lessons learned kind of data. Yeah.
Gareth, you can stop getting blamed for procurement and you can say this is what it should be, and you can stand on the soapbox.
Okay, a quick question to George and Tommy as well. Since you're collecting all this data on projects, are there some projects you just go, wow, that's really high carbon, or they're being really efficient here? Can you start to get a gut feeling for productivity? Or is it still, you're not there yet, you haven't built up enough cases?
I'll take it away as an action. I'm not doing it. We're not. We should be. We haven't quite got to the. We need to be comparing them. I totally agree, and we can do it sector specific then as well. We can do it for particular principal contractors. It could be, we could get some really interesting stats out of there. We've got about 250 projects live on InnDex at the moment. If we could, put that in a point cloud and say, well, yeah, it would be really interesting. I'll make that happen.
I was going to say from our side is like we do simulations based on what we expect to happen. We have obviously loads of health and safety and location data for people and plant, but we don't apply it to projects because quite in a sort of sad way, we haven't been asked for that information. So what we need to do is sort of what the hackathon sounds really good because it gives us an opportunity to demonstrate how it would work, and therefore hopefully that will generate some interest because we're just using data that already exists. It's nothing new.
And I think that's me and Tommy have been talking for ages and trying to speak to clients and say, look, this is the information you could get by using our systems joined together. And there's no drive for it. And it's so frustrating because we can see the potential and the power of it, but no one wants to see it, I guess. That's half the problem.
Yeah, I think that's the leadership gap thing that we were talking about at the start of the week. It's absolutely having the will and the want from the leadership and giving them insight because they don't know. I think to Char's point that they need to be informed and educated about what exists, what data and what answers are out there, and the case studies. Maybe that's what you were going to say, James.
That was exactly what I was going to say, word for word. Yeah, and not just InnDex and Plinks, but all the others. Like we could easily assemble 10, 20 of us in a year's time or towards the end of the year. Build a hackathon around it, get a virtual team, get some C-suite in there to see what we can do.
George, did you see? Sorry, the thing that came to mind, James, was did you see the number of players that there was a study conducted by Cambridge or Oxford University? And the number of players that have solutions in this space is ridiculous, right? And they mapped out a really cool kind of visual of everyone that's trying to do something. And the problem is we're all going at it, and it needs to be a bit more orchestrated and they kind of saying that as part of the report. Really worth reading that case study.
Which one is that? The one that was shared the other day?
Yeah, we'll recirculate it. I think I'll find and recirculate it. It's a really good study that kind of says we know the answers. I think, or we're starting to get close to the answers, but we need to be a bit more strategic about how we go at this and consolidate our view so that we don't just have everyone's trying to have it as their competitive advantage. And that's great because I'm a small business owner and I do that day in day out. But really, if we want to have and go back to the moral kind of discussion, it's about doing this for the planet and working together and coming together to tackle the challenge.
Yeah, open source.
Totally agree. And it's almost half the problem with some of these big schemes. I'll mention HS2. They've done, one of our competitors does the whole of HS2, right? And it's because they want to get all of the information. But if actually everybody just worked together, everybody could select the tools they want to use, but the information still gets pulled in the right place so we can still measure it all. And that's where we need to get to. We shouldn't even have companies having to go down one line of software. They should be able to say, well, we can have, this is our ecosystem, we can use whatever we want and pull and push and whatever, but all the information is still fed into the central database. That's where we need to get to.
I think even on that project, there's a lot of, even now that we are working on, there is a lot of confusion around data sharing and how that's going to actually happen going forward. What happens at the end of the project, what data is owned by who, even though data is being generated today, it's still not clear who's actually going to own it. So I completely agree with you, George. It's just, I think to some degree, it's a level of sophistication that we have to take them on the journey a little bit with us to understand what's going to happen in 5-10 years when the project's complete.
Yeah, and that data that gets collected, if everyone's collecting different data, how do you trust someone else's data? You know, it needs to be all one single, not single necessarily, but whatever's collected needs to be trusted, right? But universally, that is the constant. That, you know, that's the same for everything.
What about, maybe that's another part of the framework then, the idea of what data, because I think the idea of the industry coming together, sharing data, open sourcing tools that it's developing is the only way really that we'll ever achieve any of the goals that they're setting out, because otherwise everyone's just reinventing the wheel.
Yeah.
So maybe that's part of the framework that we develop, is saying that these are the data sets we think that should be open source and shared across industry to help achieve X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
There's another part of your jigsaw, James.
Yeah, and does that apply? So does that apply to the micro as well as the macro data? So the micro stuff where you're starting to record and track for rates that Chris and I could use with planning.
I think that's,
at macro level, you're kind of then getting a wide angle view of the industry and the project types that are lower or higher productivity, lower carbon. We can start then tracking, is that happening? Are people doing that? That's not industry wide, is it?
it's not. I think everyone has their own little versions of micro level data, like planning output rates or costs. You know, everyone has their own little versions of that. But with carbon, it should be fairly constant. Maybe there's local differences, but it should be pretty much the same, shouldn't it? You should be able to have micro and macro as just one single. I mean, everyone has their own competitive edge with planning outputs, for example, but generally a bricklayer is going to do X amount of square meters per day. And that's not going to be massively different. Maybe some do it a little bit quicker, some go a little bit slower. But carbon's carbon, right? Apart from, and maybe there's some minor differences for conditions. I don't know. But like we said earlier, that there would be an allowance for a margin of error or margin of safety in these constants. You'd make an allowance, like designers over design when they're coming up with calculations for structure. They will over design it. They'll put a margin of safety in there. So and cost people will overestimate. They'll put they put money in for waste. So there's always, nothing's going to be perfect, but we should be able to get something that's fairly universal.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we'll put this into the framework. Is there anything else? Because we're at the half hour. Any other questions? Or should we leave it there?
James, just check out my 2013 4D animation. See how good you think it is. I don't think I slept. You don't have to watch it now, but definitely one to learn where you can get some pointers from.
Really? Yeah. Okay. That is good, John. That's really good. We appreciate that. Watching it now. Do you want a job? Do you want to work with me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen you only read, James. So
Nice place to finish. Can we cut now?